What is up, everyone? It's your boy Shaft, aka that mill guy, coming at you with a very quick video. I hope anyway. I blabber a lot. This time going over a topic that I think has come up a little bit in terms of ever since I started posting kind of my sideboard guide to the current modern mill list I'm using, and that'll be linked down below in the mill Discord, so please check that out over there. I update it about kind of a couple times a month, and people have asked me, oh Shaft, why don't you bring in this card? It does so great against X card in this matchup. Or Shaft, I really think this card needs to leave so you can take this card in, and stuff like that. And so I wanted to take the opportunity to talk about overboarding in modern mill, just because the deck itself, as many of you know, require you to play it almost perfectly to real like 95-99% efficiency to really get what you want out of the list. There's a lot of decisions you have to make just because you're fighting the other decks in the formats you may be playing, primarily modern here, at an angle that they're not playing you at. So you have to work a little bit harder, and naturally the angle you're playing at, the graveyard, is really equipped with a lot of answers. So I'm thinking classically of cards like, of course, Luros, just being able to recur things when you mill things over, and against the aggro matchups, I'm thinking of cards like Lava Dart. So you got to think a little bit farther ahead in terms of what your plan is and how to execute that plan. And that really, again, as the screen showing this individual surfing here, you know, the concept of overboarding. So let's go into it with a couple of specific case studies I want to go over here. So if we just bring that back, we can close that up. So right here on the screen, what I have for you is my sideboard. I'm actually just gonna, I realized how I did this is not really logical, so we're just gonna do that and bring it back. That's a bit more logical, so you can actually see my sideboard on here. So we have it up on Goldfish on visual view. So as of the recording of this video, this is my sideboard. If you're watching this in the future, this may have changed. You want to check the mill Discord in the comment section down below, but the concepts are still there. So specifically, first things first, I want to talk about, is it tempo? Is it Murktide, UR, Murktide, whatever you want to call it? One of the bigger issues for mill in game 1, game 2, game 3, however far you take them, is Murktide Regent. Again, an example of what I was talking about earlier, a happenstance of a card that is able to take advantage of the alternative axis that we're fighting people on. They have methods such as Thought Scour to feed their own graveyard to turn on Murktide Regent, but we're able to do that for them. So this is a really tough target, especially because, again, when put down early, it beats Drown in the Lock because it needs cards in the yard to kill something like this. So again, we're playing stuff like Doomblade mainboard, but yikes, this is our primary problem. But Shaft, what about stuff like Dragon's Rage Channeler or Ragavan? Well, for cards like that in the main board, if we kind of slice over here, we have 4 Fatal Push in the main board, and then we have 4 Drown in the Lock. What are the chances that they don't have at least 1 card in their yard, even after a fetch or something like that? Or you're able to put at least maybe 3 in with the Ruin Crab. So you're going to be fine with those 4 pieces. The Murktide Regent is why you want the Doomblade and stuff. So why am I bringing all this up? I'm talking about overboarding and bringing in Aether Gust. The primary plan that you have right now, and I'm still kind of split on how to get there, but the primary plan is, of course, to mill them out and deal with the early threats. Remember that a deck like this isn't going to beat you a lot of the times with its spells. It only has 4 lightning bolts. It wants to beat you with its creatures. So if you're able to 1-for-1 their removal, they will always have to tap out for their forward threats, and in that way you want to make sure that your answers are always better. Okay, now putting a bunch of 2-mana removal spells into your deck, such as Aether Gust, isn't really going to line up that well with Dragon's Rage Channeler and Ragavan. They're always going to beat you on mana. So you want to be as efficient as possible, which is why we have the Fatal Push and other ways to regulate the deck. Dragon Rage Channeler can be regulated by, again, something like a Soul Guide Lantern. But we have to beat Murktide Regent. We can mill them out. If you are going with the plan of Tasha's Hideous Laughter, if you surgical out the Murktide, you can mill them out pretty easily, but we have to get there. So you don't want to Overboard because Aether Gust does not deal with the ultimate threat of Murktide Regent. Your other spells already deal with the Channeler, the Ragavan, but not the Murktide because Aether Gust doesn't do that. So you want cards like Doomblade for that. But Aether Gust doesn't really solve any other problems. What are you going to Aether Gust the Expressive Iteration? That's not the game you want to play. So specifically in this matchup, I do not bring in Aether Gust because that's not what this matchup is for. That's not what this card is for in your sideboard, and that's what you want to remember. When you take sideboard guides from me and you're not looking at the guide itself, you got to remember, just because I'm not bringing in, there's a reason for it. So let's look at another matchup here. Specifically, I want to go into the Living End matchup right here. Another matchup where, Shaf, in your sideboard guide, you're talking about how you're not bringing in Aether Gust against this matchup. You're bringing in Test of Talents. Of course, I'm bringing in Test of Talents because it gets rid of the forces, so they don't have any answers. It gets rid of the Violent Outburst, and of course, the namesake card, Living End. And then, okay, you're bringing in Soul Guides as well, but look, Aether Gust hits the Violent Outburst. That's pretty useful. Hits, I don't know if they ever cast this, hits that. It also hits the Shardless Agent. That's, again, it hits their two Cascade, their ways to Cascade into the Living End. Why not bring in? Look. Aether Gust does not deal with anything else in the deck. Not efficiently. All right, so you could be looking at stuff like Force of Vigor or Foundation Breaker in the sideboard, but the primary plan in this matchup is going to be surgical the Living End, or deal with the Living End in some way, shape, or form, and then deal with their threats one for one, because that's when they're going to start casting them. Then deal with their threats one for one, which you always can. Your removal spells will always outvalue. In that case, once you get rid of Living End, it will always outvalue the CMC of their creatures. Look at how high that their CMC is. Look at how low cost something like Doomblade or something like Drown in the Loch is. Now, Doomblade is a little bit iffy in a matchup like this. Obviously, they have street rates and the griefs and stuff, but they also have other creatures, so you need whatever answers you can get, okay, against those creatures if they come down. So this is why I don't bring in cards like Aether Gust, because although they do have applications, that's not the plan. Your plan is get rid of Living End and then mill them out slowly by then one-for-oneing their creatures, because your mana values of the kind of answers versus the threats are much better. So these are the things that you generally want to think of here. Actually, there is one more matchup that I do want to talk about here, and it's so think about it like this. Let me even go into the mirror itself. So in the mirror, we have cards like Hedron Crab and Ruin Crab. Okay, so this might be a bit more of a simpler example, which is why I wanted to bring it up. So in my sideboard guide, if we take a look at it right here, in my sideboard guide, I'm bringing in something like 3 Test of Talents and 1 Soul Guide Lantern for value, right? And I'm taking out the Crypt Incursions, the Tasha's Hideous Laughter, and the Doomblade, right? I'm taking out the Doomblade. I'm not even bringing in the one in the sideboard. So Shaft, why not? You got to be able to deal with the Ruin Crabs, the Hedron Crabs. What if they have Jesus Phantasm as their sideboard? What do we do? Look, you have 8 pieces of removal already. The chances are, if you're able to remove the first Ruin Crab, Hedron Crab, they generally do not have a second. They have to then tap out to play that and then play lands, which means they're not able to cast Drown and Lock on turn 2. They're not able to play the Maddening Cacophony on turn 2. They're not able to cycle the Fractured Sanity, and so on and so forth. So there's ways to tempo them out there. Just have that removal for the first thing, and then you don't need to overboard and have all this removal for these quote-unquote potential threats that they have. Okay, Shaf, why don't you play something like, you know, the Soul Guide Lanterns? What if they have a shuffle effect against you? Don't you want to be able to, you know, like if you're beating them all the mill plan, don't you want to be able to make sure they don't turn on visions? No. I'm bringing in the 1 Soul Guide as value. Okay, it's a kind of make your own Mishra's Bauble with the Luros in case a matchup like this goes long. Can happen with something like Mirrors, where you're both kind of holding up interaction. But I'm not worried about any of that stuff. The mill mirror is all about, again, who can stick their Hedron Crab and who can get rid of the most mill spells. So stuff like Surgical and Test of Talents, those are your ace in the holes. And those are what you want to play to. You want to 1-for-1 the interaction in the mirror. And you just want to take it from there. It's just that simple. Overboarding is not the way that you want to go in anything like this. Okay? Just because a deck has graveyard interactions, deals with the graveyard, might not mean that you want to bring in Soul Guide Lantern. Maybe that deck can be dealt with by just, literally, by just removing all of their threats. And that actually reminds me here, there's one here. I think I have it. Yeah, there is one here. So, again, something like Hardened Scales. Now, Hardened Scales specifically, if we move back, we're going to use this as our final example. If we just kind of move through, I can look at the list properly. So, Hardened Scales, they do have some level of graveyard interaction, right? So, there is going to be some way that they, kind of deal with the graveyard in, of course, the Arcbound Worker, and they do have some level of protection here and there. But remember, the graveyard interaction that they have, they're not bringing anything back. Okay, you can't like prevent the death of these with Soul Guide Lantern. And even if you had something like Rest in Peace, even if you had something like Leyline of the Void, would you really bring it in against Hardened Scales? Remember, folks, we have something like Tasha's Hideous Laughter. If we're able to just deal with their threats 1-for-1 and keep it going, stay alive with stuff like Crypt Incursion, board wipe them with something like Hurkyl's Recall, that is the type of tempo that we want. And then ultimately, a card like Tasha's Hideous Laughter is going to end this game. Just because you're playing Esper and you have the Rest in Peace doesn't mean you need to bring it in against this matchup. Maybe you don't have enough sideboard slot or answers and you bring that in, sure. But in a vacuum, with a sideboard like this, let's say the Soul Guide Lanterns were replaced with Rest in Peace. Would I bring in Rest in Peace against a Hardened Scales matchup? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. You do not need to overboard. You know why? Tasha's Hideous Laughter and all of your Doom Blades, all of your Fatal Pushes, all of your Drowning Locks are going to be more than enough to deal with their threats until you ultimately slam a Tasha's Hideous Laughter. And if you remember from my last video, we talked about how Tasha's Hideous Laughter on average mills this deck for 40 plus cards. There is absolutely no way you're telling me that your opponent isn't dead by then. Or actually near like loss, like they're not conceding. There's absolutely no way. They are done after Resolve Tasha's Zone. That is what you're playing for. You are not playing to interact with them on ways that they're not trying to beat you at. It doesn't matter. Let the Hangerback Walker die. Let them create the tokens. You have Hurkyl's Recall. You have maybe cards like Rebuild to return everything to the hand. You have cards like that. That is not the angle you want to play at. So again, just a very quick video rambling on talking about overboarding. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Do you agree with some of my points? Do you think some of those points are wrong? Would you actually bring in Rest in Peace against a deck like Hardened Scales? Let me know in the comment section down below. These are just my thoughts and just some tips that I thought I could pass on to y'all. And we'll just call this the end of the video. Remember that even the impossible is possible. And as we ponder that thought, I hope you'll join me next time as we take a glimpse into the unthinkable.